Brian, it's so good to be with you this morning here in Atlanta on a beautiful day. Thanks for making some time for a discussion on, among other things, infrastructure, whether it's pipeline infrastructure or transmission infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I think that it's really good. I think everybody gets so excited about renewable energy and especially investment in renewable energy, and they think about generation when it comes to power, or then maybe they think about renewable natural gas, or hydrogen's a big one now, right? You think about all these things, they're like, oh, all exciting. You're like, well, how do they get to people?
Right.
And so I think it's very important to think about, and then on top of that, when it comes to renewables, how can renewables work with other, kind of all the above strategy of making in the capacity crunch aspects? Natural gas plays a big role.
Yeah, so I'm going to digress from the very beginning. I went to my first Buc-ee's yesterday.
Oh my goodness.
Off the interstate in South
Buc-ee's
Carolina.
is fantastic.
Yeah. But there's a reason that
some.
Buc-ee's is located immediately off the Florence, South Carolina exit, where there's this massive transportation artery, and they have, I'm sure, projections of how many cars are going to see that sign and get off the highway. And isn't energy the same thing? You got to put the generation assets in a place where you can connect to the grid. And in reality, our grid, our natural gas pipeline infrastructure is 50, 60, 70 years old. And I'll set safety aside for a minute, but that's a pretty compelling issue on its own. How do we ensure that the infrastructure is there to support the growth that we want to see?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important issue, but I think you raise a good point, which is the infrastructure that we have has been built to be in the centers where we need it. And so natural gas, coal, a lot of these plants that we have that aren't renewables based have been put where we need them more. So the centralized kind of Edisonian kind of thought process. What we have is we have that kind of structure right now, infrastructure wise. And the renewable side of things is, could be something in the desert or something way out here, or wherever the wind's blowing the best. Might not be where the load is, i.e. the demand for power or demand for gas, if it's renewable natural gas. The farms where you have methane and may not be exactly where you need the renewable natural gas. Yeah. So it's all comes down to how do you get where people are wanting to put their money, investing, how do you get that to, the users of these products?
I imagine in your world, a critical component is how do you tap that solar into the grid?
Oh yeah, now, and in fact, it's interesting. It used to be that our deals were, what about the revenue document, right? So the PPA, the power purchase agreement, or the REC agreement, or whatever aspects are in terms of the renewables. And it's funny, you can get those fairly easily, more so, either from the utilities through RFPs, corporates who are wanting to get involved because of ESG aspects. And so then all of a sudden, interconnects become more critical than anything else because of the updates to the grid that are needed. So there's huge upgrade costs. And so if you haven't kind of modeled the appropriate amount of upgrade costs, suddenly that could decide whether your project lives or dies. And can you share it with others? Is it going to be subsidized across the grid versus it's just going to be put on you? All those things become almost more critical than anything else.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I've only had one case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court in my professional career, and it involved one of the most intractable landscape scale impediments to new linear electric and power infrastructure, Appalachian Trail. 2,200 miles from Georgia to Maine. It was enacted into a scenic and protected area years after original pipelines were in the ground and transmission lines were on the landscape. But now, in order to cross over or cross under, you literally have to have an act of Congress. And it takes the whole eastern seaboard and puts it in this very uncomfortable spot of how do you provide new utility infrastructure to our military installations, most of which are up and down the East Coast. How do you get to these huge growth centers in the Southeast if you can't navigate these odd federal land protection issues, which are critically important? But at some point you need to balance the need for that infrastructure to keep the lights on.
Yeah, no, and it's funny you say that because we've had many clients who've looked at adding gas pipelines just to, for security purposes or for whatever purposes, for just, hey, we want more capacity in terms of being able to supply the gas. And then if it's not within a state, if it's across state lines, if it's across county lines sometimes, suddenly it just becomes a huge problem. You got the NIMBYism we were talking about before, not in my backyard.
Right.
But it becomes a very political and difficult process to get through. And sometimes while all of this is important, and it's funny because I think natural gas pipeline is extremely important, even if we're talking about, renewable energy and other things, because it's not just about power, it's about heating, it's about other aspects of what that natural gas is used for. I think you raised a very good point on the national security front, because a lot of our bases, they're transitioning, but there's a lot of natural gas usage, and so it's.
And we haven't even talked about renewable natural gas, but here we're trying to solve an environmental challenge with an environmental opportunity, but that also needs pipeline infrastructure.
Exactly.
It really doesn't matter what's going through the pipe.
Correct.
It's where is the pipe,
yes,
and who supports it and who doesn't.
Yep. Yeah, and the same with hydrogen. I've talked to several of our clients who are in the gas space, and I always go, well, you're not going to put hydrogen in a pipeline, are you? And like, no, I think we're going to be able to do that. And I'm like, really? I was like, and I'm a skeptic only from hydrogen, only from the standpoint of, it's going to degrade or it's going to create issues. But a lot of people think the mix of hydrogen with natural gas could be a solution to some of the issues, like renewable natural gas, hydrogen, all those things will end up creating less carbon.
Well, I just don't think the normal consumer, including any of us, appreciates that even today we are so constrained that literally trucks are taking natural gas and moving it from point A bottleneck to a point B end of bottleneck and putting it back into the pipe in order to avoid that otherwise intractable impediment. And that's not a really viable long-term solution to getting fuel to where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And the same could be said for anything that you put in the pipe.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I think, we all have seen the politics of these huge pipelines that have either been, they've had to be canceled or have not been approved. I said, but I think you were talking about one actually came through. I think you called it a unicorn, but
well, having lived and died through a couple of them, it is interesting that as part of the last debt ceiling compromise in the summer, Mountain Valley Pipeline received congressional authorization to be approved in the final pieces of construction completed. But I called it a unicorn because when in recent memory has Congress acted so decisively to green light a piece of critical infrastructure? And is that really the best use of Congress's time to have to deal project by project? It feels like more fundamental streamlining should occur through the federal agencies with authorization from Congress to make good decisions about where we have reliability issues or capacity issues. And of course, we live in a world where everything should get a very hard look from an environmental standpoint. And if there are better alternatives, they should be rigorously reviewed. But ultimately, we need to solve our capacity and reliability issues. And if we don't, we're all going to be in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think to your point, it's interesting that DOE and FERC, in terms of the power side of things, trying to find ways to facilitate more transmission. And I think they've been doing that. It's some folks probably think it's slower than it should, but I think also it's like what I said before, is like you get all excited about the shiny new thing and you kind of forget that, hey, there's this other stuff, the classic stuff that you actually need to get it there.
Yeah.
And so, but I do think, there's some facilitation, there's some DOE loans and things like that could really help, and it's focused on transmission infrastructure, but could kind of hopefully be thought through for the transportation issue too as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many parallels there.
I do too.
They could follow a similar paradigm.
Yeah, and it's probably because everybody thinks of renewable power that's why the transmission gets the gets the show. But I think as hydrogen hubs, as you get into renewable natural gas, I think you get those things going, then where you're going to end up is then natural gas will be the natural extension of kind of these policies for transmission flowing over to flowing. Also, I don't mean to be so punny, but in any event, yeah, it's. I think it'll naturally go that way.
Yeah. Well, I know we could keep talking for a while, but in the interest of time, it's been a great conversation, and I hope we get to do it again.
No, thank you, Brooks. I really appreciate it.